I'm Patty McCarthy, the Development Director for the library, and it's my pleasure to introduce Miyoko Hikiji, who is an Iowa native, continues to live in Iowa after spending some time in Iraq. She is a veteran, and we'll be talking about her work now with the Iowa the Veterans National Recovery Center in Iowa, where she's an instructor for the Writing My Way Back Home project, which is helping service members deal with the issues that they may have when they return to life in the United States and Iowa. Miyoko served with the Iowa National Guard for 9 years, and she was on 70 missions throughout the Northwest Quadrant in Iraq in 2003 and 2004. She will be selling copies of her memoir, All I Could Be, My Story as a Woman Warrior in Iraq, after her presentation. And please join me in giving a warm welcome to Miyoko.
Thank you. Let me make sure I get the lights here also. Any veterans in the audience today? Thank you for your service. With Veterans Day coming up, I'm always sort of reminded that Veterans Day really is every day. It's something that we can always be grateful for, something that we can always honor the sacrifice of service members on a continuous basis. But I do appreciate the time, especially around Veterans Day, when we pay more special attention to that. I'm going to give it a while to see if the feed comes up. I think it will.
Can I close the show for a second?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I'm sorry.
I think you got it. You're up on.
Is it working? Okay.
It's just really
I'm
faint.
sorry.
No problem.
Why is it so faint?
Is it coming up?
Yeah, it's coming up.
Brightening a little.
Okay. Well, I don't really need that first slide to begin. One thing when I do my presentations, I always go back and look at what some of the numbers are for casualties in the Middle East. It's something I try to follow sort of on a daily basis, and it always surprises me when I have a new opportunity to speak to a new audience, how that number changes. I look at Memorial Day to Memorial Day, Veterans Day to Veterans Day, and how that number continues to grow. And it always reinforces for me sort of the impact that a number can and can't have. When a number is very large, it in a way can have a large impact on us, but truly to be able to tell thousands of stories, the impact of thousands of lives, it almost seems like an impossible task. So I think that when we start with the numbers, we forget about the stories of the people. When we stop telling their stories, we fail to honor their memories. When we fail to honor their memories, we are no longer a grateful nation, but we are a grateful nation. Every citizen that takes a moment, like today, sits in silence or whispers a prayer, visits the grave sites, goes to Arlington, is demonstrating that the nation has not forgotten the sacrifices of the servicemen and women of the U.S. Armed Forces, or their families, or their communities, or their unit members that have lost the most precious commodity that this country still produces, and that is patriots. A patriot is a passionate person that defends the liberties and the luxuries of his or her country, puts the needs of others above self. A modern-day patriot grips tightly to the ideals that never go out of season: loyalty, duty, and courage. In the last about decade of war in Iraq and Afghanistan, the number of fallen patriots today totals 6,836. That's 160 women and 74 Iowans. Now, I don't know exactly how to describe 6,836 pair of boots without feet, dog tag chains without their necks and helmets without their heads, or how to describe the rifles without the two hands that used to grip the stock. I don't know how to articulate the heart-piercing, soul-quieting reverence of Arlington, but nearly the same number, just over 6,679 veterans and their dependents are buried there every year. I don't know how to talk very well about numbers, but I can tell you a story. The photo on the right is Aaron James George Sissel. He was born on Valentine's Day in 1981 to Kirk and Joe Allen Sissel. He lived in Tipton, and he graduated from high school in 1998 and enlisted in the Iowa Army National Guard that following fall. He did his basic training and heavy vehicle job school at Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri. And after the September 11th terrorist attacks, Sissel volunteered for force protection duty, where he met his fiancée, Carrie, and me. Sissel worked the overnight shift, and I worked the first shift. When we changed the guard shift over, I always noticed that everything was squared away. In the wintertime, he'd warmed up the Humvee for us, topped off the generator with fuel, cleaned the guard shack, completed the paperwork, and not every guard did this. Not everyone cared. And now that the gates of Camp Dodge are no longer protected by body armor and M16s, and no terrorist has ever infiltrated its gates, plenty could argue that it never even mattered. But it mattered to Sissel. He did things the right way. He worked hard, and he was a strong team member. He cared. And those qualities, along with his easy smile, made him easy to like. He was the type of friend you were glad to have on your side. He was a true patriot. In 2003, he answered the call again, deploying with the 2133rd Transportation Company to Iraq for a year, where his above and beyond the call duty performance was recognized by General Roger Schultz, the director of the Army National Guard at the time, with a general's coin. But his highest military decorations, the Purple Heart, the Army Commendation Medal, and the Bronze Star, were awarded only after he made the highest sacrifice a soldier can make, with his life. It was the Saturday after Thanksgiving, a day that reminds me, even of Iraq, of a day like today in Iowa. It was November 29th. The good people of the Army and Air Force Exchange Shop had put out the Christmas cards. It was the rainy season, it was cold and it was windy, and the fine desert sands turned into a sea of muck and mud. Everything there was a depressed gray. I was coming from Forward Operating Base Quinn near the Syrian border, heading north on the main supply route, returning from a supply convoy mission. Sissel was returning from a mission at Forward Operating Base Tiger, driving south on the same road when his convoy was ambushed. Sissel and another troop's 50 cal gunner were killed. Sissel's co-driver, Gottschalk, the photo on the left, sustained a debilitating injury as a bullet passed through his ear and exited his eye. I listened to the radio transmissions and the messages sent over the movement tracking system laptop. My convoy couldn't get there in time, neither could the medevac helicopter. Sissel died in the northwestern sands of Iraq at age 22. He never got to marry Carrie or start his family, and I did. I have 2 beautiful daughters now, and I don't dare take that for granted. I don't dare act ungrateful for the chances I've had in life since returning home safely 10 years ago. I don't forget how to honor Sissel's memory. I don't forget to tell his story. If I did, Aaron James George Sissel would just be one of 6,836. But he counts for so much more than one number. He is not forgotten. Aaron is one of 2 unit members of mine that died in Iraq in 2003. And while I was there, I very quickly realized that I was living a story that deserved to be told. That my family and the people in Iowa, it wasn't accessible to them. It wasn't even maybe imaginable. So I spent a lot of time there taking notes. After missions, by flashlight, pen and paper, the old-fashioned way, and came home with hundreds of pages of raw material from my mission days. And step by step, I started to put a book together. I think my main goals for the book was to share the story of the Iowa Guard, which to me is close to my heart, but I truly believe it's a special story. While we were there, lots of other units with people from all across the country came to find Hawkeye, is what they called us, because they knew we were highly skilled and we were willing to help. Since we were a National Guard unit, we weren't truck drivers for a living. We were college students or firefighters or police officers, electricians and farmers. And a group of people like that can do just about anything. So when somebody needed to innovate or build or do something with their unit area, they would come see us. And not only did we know how to do it, but we said yes. And there's something so awesome about coming home to Iowa knowing that that's what we're about. I also wanted to be able to tell the story of the women that were in my unit. The majority of the book focuses on just my story, but I think that women in literature in war don't have a very large role as the hero. We tend to see women in war stories as the victims or as a problem, but never really the main character. So that was something else I wanted to do for my memoir story. I, of course, wanted to honor the stories and the legacy of Aaron Sissel and David Kirchhoff. And I wanted to leave a living legacy for my daughters who were born after I came home and would never otherwise have a very descriptive vision of what their mother used to be. I like to start with that story, but I'll introduce myself a little further. I went to Iowa State and finished a journalism degree. My book was my first major project. I haven't worked technically in media. I do a little freelance journalism, but really my main focus is raising my family right now and working on a second book at home. The Writing My Way Back Home program is, it's an annual weekend. It used to be here in Iowa City. It's been moved to the Veterans Memorial in Cedar Rapids now. There's another location in Kansas City. And what we encourage veterans and now their spouses and family members to do is to just come to a space and tell their story. You don't have to be a writer. We're all storytellers. And it gives them the opportunity in a very safe space among a group of people who have some familiarity with military life to be able to maybe dig into something that any other day they might just not sit down and say, hey, I'm going to approach this subject. So we do some workshops on character and description, plot and dialogue, and we give the community a chance to hear an open reading at the end so that something that was created gives the chance to have real voice for the people that get a sense that that's what they need. It's a very neat program, so if you know anyone who would be interested in doing that, please make sure to get in contact with me. Maybe you heard about Senate File 2111 this year. It was the first, Iowa was the first state to pass a military sexual assault bill in the country. We were looking at kind of the discussion that was going on at the national level from New York Senator Kirsten Gillibrand. We weren't seeing that that was moving out of committee and getting the support it needed, though both Harkin and Grassley co-sponsored the bill. So we thought, you know, there are 10,000 soldiers right here in Iowa that we can have an impact on when it comes to this issue. And we know that we are not the only one of all 50 states that do not have this problem. We all have to own it. So by stepping out first, we've been able to really give some momentum to other states like Arizona and California that are now passing bills that are in the same realm. The three keys to that bill One was that if a soldier went to a commander and reported a sexual assault, the commander now has the duty to report it to the civilian authority. There's no more in-house discretion. There's no more, we'll handle it our way. When the soldier tells the commander that this crime has been committed and gives permission, the commander now has the duty to report that. If a person in the midst of the investigation of that crime destroys evidence, threatens the person who has made the report, they are now subject to a court-martial. And the last piece of the bill was that annually there would be a report to the governor and the Veterans Affairs Committees on the number of cases that are being reported in the Guard, so that we can sort of get a baseline as to what's going on, so we know that the training and the things being implemented, if that's effective in taking us on where we need to go. We are going to work on an amendment to that bill in the following year also. When I came home from Iraq, my enlistment had ended. I had had my 8-year contract, but the deployment extended me to that 9th year. When I came home, besides finishing my degree, I wasn't sure what I wanted to do, because going down to the Des Moines Register and being interviewed for a job where they wanted me to cover war news wasn't where I was ready to be. But I knew that there was still a lot that I could do that had to do with military life. And this was something that captured my attention. 22%, and this is probably a fairly low number, of veterans suffer from post-traumatic stress disorder or major depression from the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. 34% a related mental condition, and only 1 out of 3 are seeking help for that. I think that's staggering numbers. And so is this. 22 veterans commit suicide every day. Unbelievable. So I know that within the systems that we're working with, improving in the VA, there are lots of people in the community. The community is the 99%. The people in uniform are the 1%. There must be a way for us to reach out and get around this problem and give some alternative solutions that get them where they need to go, to more fully reintegrate into their community and civilian life. The joke is always, the Army taught me how to be a soldier, but they never taught me how to be a civilian. They did a good job, though, of teaching me how to be a soldier. This was a very popular campaign in the 80s, early 90s. It's what drew me in. This was the campaign between the CBS Evening News with Dan Rather and MASH. And there wasn't anything that could be more exciting for me at the time than the idea of going somewhere far away from Cedar Rapids, Iowa, this small town, because I was 18 and I was ready for an adventure and to see the world, and do it riding on tanks or riding in Humvees or something like this. So I made that call, and I was gone in 3 weeks. I went to Fort Jackson, South Carolina for my basic training. I did a supply and armor job school at Fort Lee, Virginia. My first permanent duty station was Fort Polk, Louisiana. And then I was transferred to Fort Bliss, Texas. So I lived 4 places in the first 3 years. I was really ready after earning that GI Bill to then move on to Iowa State. So that's when I joined the Iowa Guard and decided to work on my degree and be a part-time soldier. I have to give my parents and my family a lot of credit. My father's on the left, that's in Korea, 1956. I think my father had a lot of guts to serve in that time period. Because he was originally from Hawaii, he was born in Hawaii as a US citizen, but his family spent some time in the internment camps during World War II. He remembers the bombing of Pearl Harbor very well, and sort of the racist backlash from the country that followed. But he was very proud to be American, and he very proudly served. The picture on the right is my great Uncle Stan and Aunt Wanda. They were in the Marines in World War II. And the lady in the middle is my mother. She never served in a military uniform, but she had 5 children, and she ran a sort of like a squad, and she was probably the toughest drill sergeant I ever had. She went to UNI Teachers College. This was my first unit at Fort Polk, Louisiana. This is an Avenger. I don't think it's even in the regular Army inventory anymore. This is a short-range missile with a 50 cal gun. I was a supply clerk in this unit, so it was my job to get them everything that they needed to fight that section of the battlefield. My Iowa Guard unit was a transportation company. I drove a 5-ton truck most of the time. I also drove a tractor trailer with a flatbed. We trained at Fort McCoy in February of 2003. Kuwait was quite a change in weather when we got there in May. This was the unit that we supported, the 3rd Armored Cavalry Regiment from Fort Carson, Colorado. These are the war fighters. They have the Bradley fighting vehicles, the M1A1 Abrams, and the Apache helicopters. They had a tremendous job to secure the borders from Turkey to Syria and Jordan, all the way into central Iraq and to Baghdad. The roads with checkpoints, and the major cities in that area, including Fallujah, Ramadi, Tikrit, and Kirkuk. The transportation company had a platoon from Cedar Rapids, about 30 people from Cedar Rapids, then platoons from Centerville and Muscatine. There were about 16 women in that unit, and we transported fuel, water, food, enemy prisoners, ammunition. We had the chance to, some people in our unit trained the Iraqi border police in hopes that they would start to begin to work on taking over some of their own operations. That was a long time ago, and that was a high hope, because now we see that didn't work out exactly as we wanted. Does that head look familiar? It's kind of really shadowy because I only had a disposable camera at the time. I didn't think to bring anything really nice there with me. When they pulled down that statue in Ferdo Square with the tank, the big statue of Saddam Hussein, they took the head off. Can't tell you why. And it was on a truck headed down through Kuwait to the port when we were going up into Iraq. So I wanted to get my chance, since I never saw him, to give Saddam a nice punch in the jaw there. This is his palace in Ramadi. The palaces were really quite extraordinary, considering the mud huts and the other places that everyone else lived, the backed up sewer systems, the burning trash, and then a sprinkler system where you had grass in the desert around a palace with marble and tile and glass, and it was quite extraordinary. We did a very good job of rearranging that with a missile. He wasn't in it at the time, but we lived on that palace lawn in tents for a couple weeks while we were supporting a mission there. And that's sort of the hallway inside in one of the main rooms. Kind of the roadside view. There were a lot of people from the towns that approached us to sell things. Why? Because we had money that was worth something, and because they had no other economy to really support them. I met marine biologists with PhDs that were selling t-shirts, translators fluent in English. People would come from the university in Baghdad who had no real work to do. So they were fixing tires and selling gas and or anything that they could do along the street to sustain themselves and support their families. Some of the destruction from Iraq was there still from the Gulf War in 90. Tanks that had been blown up, buildings that had been destroyed, a lot of the infrastructure. It was something that, for me, through my eyes, was very hard to see, because I could tell that, you know, for a generation or two, the people had been held hostage in their own country by, you know, the dictating forces, and that in the ways in which we were trying to help them, we had to do things like enforce curfews so that we could watch for insurgent movements, which kept the people who were doing nothing in their houses with the lights off and the shades drawn for years. And I imagine that that was a very, very terrible way to live. Very difficult to drive on the roadways because they didn't really want to be around these enormous convoys. So they had very limited transportation to get place to place where they could probably feel safe. We had the opportunity to go to a girls' school. This was civil affairs. This was our chance to be in the community and say, we're here to support you. What can we do to help your school? And we did build desks and chairs and bring paper and pencils and coloring books. These were girls that under Saddam Hussein's rule, it was illegal to attend school, so they were all previously closed. There's no electricity, no running water, no bathroom, no hot lunch, nothing. There's a map on the wall. Most of the children sat on the floor. They had a head instructor who taught by lecture, 3 subjects, English, religion, mathematics, about a half day, Wednesday through Saturday. And that was sort of the school system. And by going there with some supplies and standing guard around the school perimeter, they could feel like they could attend there for some period of time. I'm very, very curious to know where those girls are right now, because now they're 20-some years old. If they ever had the chance to finish that education. This isn't a political statement. This just happens to be the only news crew I met there. It was Fox News London on the left. Their foreign correspondents were there to start reporting very early on in the war, and then Geraldo Rivera, I think most of us are familiar with him. You know, I think journalists get a really bad rap, really terrible rap. Sometimes they deserve it. However, they really stick their necks out when it comes to this kind of journalism, literally. I mean, I couldn't imagine being there without my body armor, without a rifle in front of me the entire time. They were there in press blue, royal blue, with a camera sticking out the window, which I was like, the lens is reflective, you're gonna give away my position, as if my 5-ton truck on the desert landscape didn't give away my position. But really, to be there and do that, each of the men on the left at some time in their foreign journalist experience has been shot at. Lebanon, Egypt, you know, in Iraq. So risking their lives to tell the story. Numbers you should know, I went over these in the first story. And I can remember when I was in Iraq at the point where 500 soldiers had died there, because they did some sort of an awareness protest demonstration in Washington, and they put 500 pair of boots out. And it was the picture on the front of Stars and Stripes magazine, or Stars and Stripes newspaper. And I thought, oh my gosh, 500. The war started March 23rd. This is May 30th. 500. How can this be? 6,836. This is David Kirchhoff. He was the first Iowan to be killed in Iraq. He was on a mission. He actually died of a heat stroke. I'm going to read a story about him directly from the chapter, so just give me a moment to find it. Delaney, Mason, John, and I entered the former Iraqi theater that now served as a chapel. We picked up memorial programs that Marlis and I had written from a table in the back, and we found seats near the front. It was quiet. Everyone on off mission was there. Kirchhoff deserved that, our acknowledgement that he'd made the ultimate sacrifice. I opened the program and read it again. He was born in 1972. He enlisted less than a year before being deployed. He left behind his wife, 2 sons, ages 11 and 12, and 3 stepdaughters. There was a quote from his father. David was a very brave young man, serving his country, and he died serving what he loved. His mother and I and our family are very proud of him. The lieutenant pushed play on the CD player that sat on a chair at the edge of the stage, and the first notes of the national anthem surged forth. He turned up the volume, and the rocket's red glare screamed from the small speakers. Home of the Brave ended in a loud crackle when LT hit the stop. The commander and the platoon sergeant paid tribute. Then Delaney, Kirchhoff's closest friend in the platoon, took the stage. His speech was unscripted, sincere, and everything decent. The lieutenant sang Amazing Grace, an unexpected gesture that was surprisingly beautiful. The chaplain shared some words of comfort and led us in prayer. Then the first sergeant did the ceremonial roll call. Staff Sergeant George. Here, First Sergeant, he said, standing up, then taking his seat. Specialist Delaney, First Sergeant called. Here, First Sergeant. Pfc Kirchhoff. Silence. Pfc Kirchhoff. Silence. Private First Class David Kirchhoff. Crack. The first round of the firing of the volleys shattered the bitter quiet as tears ran down my cheeks. Crack. They fired again, and I swallowed a painful lump. Crack. The lonesome melody of taps wafted around us. The service was over. People stood and stared at the display of Kirchhoff's weapon, boots, helmet, and dog tags a moment before filing out of the theater. There were guard towers to climb, vehicles to prep for missions, weapons to clean, clothes to wash, jokes to tell, lives to continue living. As we shuffled out, it occurred to me he was only 31 years old. Such a short life, such young kids. We couldn't drink to him, so we smoked in silence together instead. Mason didn't even smoke, but we were in it together, all of it. When I got back to the barracks, I decided to write his folks a letter. I didn't really know what to say. Dear Mr. and Mrs. Kirchhoff, I'm sorry to write you on this deeply sad occasion. I send you my sincere sympathies and prayers for your strength and healing. All of us here share in your pain and loss. David and I met in Cedar Rapids just prior to the deployment. He was quiet but always friendly to me. We were in the same squad. He stood to my left in formation. He liked hard candies, always had a pocket full. So in formation, he'd offer me one of my favorites, the strawberry cream saver. This sweet, small act of kindness gave me at least one reason to smile every day. While at Fort McCoy, we were given a one-weekend pass. Brooke came to pick David up, and on their way back home, they went out of their way to drop me off in Toma to get a rental car. I offered to pay him, but he wouldn't accept it. His family was the most important part of his life, and it was apparent how deeply he cared for his wife. So his helping me to be with the one I loved for the weekend was not something that I could pay him for. He understood that. Had I gotten to know David better, I'm sure I would have found out what you long knew. These little acts of kindness were very much a part of his character and way of life. Anyway, I just wanted to let you know that David touched the lives of people you will never meet. All of 1st Platoon will never forget your son, our battle buddy. God bless. Sincerely, Specialist Hikiji. Everyone was out on mission. John and the rest of the battle team, Di and the other gals from my room, all except for Bev. So the two of us decided to keep busy cleaning up. I grabbed a broom from the cleaning closet. Bev started straightening the other gals' bunks. She made a tight bed with vigor and care. In fact, she did most everything that way. Bev was over 40, the oldest female in the platoon. She was something like a den mother to us. She tended to wake us up to eat breakfast when we were off mission, whether we wanted to or not, and she enforced lights out at 2200. She was short and stocky and wore a tight haircut of blonde curls. Back home, she was a prison guard at the state penitentiary, so we nicknamed her the warden. She found sanity in order and routine, was patriotic without fail, tough as nails, but not insensitive, and I admired her for that. She moved boots and shower shoes to the doorway as I swept under bunks and crooked plywood shelving, pushing out the piles of sand and dust bunnies. And on my final sweep around, my broom caught a piece of paper under Di's bunk. I picked it up and, seeing what it was, folded it and sat back down. "What?" Bev said, looking over. "What is it?" Speechless, I unfolded it for her to see. "Oh, God," she said, when she'd drawn near enough to read the signature. "What do we do with it?" "We mail it, I guess." Bev popped open her footlocker to retrieve an envelope, and as she wrote, I decided to read Kirchhoff's last letter home. 12:15, June 2nd, 2003. "Hi, honey. Well, honey, it's very hot here, about 130 degrees in the afternoon. And at night, it gets to around 90, and it feels good when night hits. God, I wish I could call you to hear your voice. I miss you so much. Sorry the paper's wet. Sweat. Oh, yeah, a lot of sand here. I've never seen so much sand. Yes, honey, we're 8 hours ahead of you. It's weird because by the time we're going to bed, it's like only 1 p.m. your time. I love you, honey. I'm lonely, but I know how much I love you, and I can't wait to come home to be with you and start our long life together. I hate this place. It's hot as fuck. Call my mom, let her know as of now where I'm at, and when I get home, I need your name and David Jr.'s in Chinese writing for 2 new tattoos. I miss you like crazy. You better put a yellow ribbon on the tree for me. I'll be home in a few months. Hopefully you'll be able to get a house by the river, and if you want, you can go get a better car than what you have. Well, my love, I'm thinking of you every day. God, I love you and I miss you, and this really sucks. I want to come home. Well, my love, I'm going to end this letter. I love you forever and always. Your husband, David. P.S. Give the girls a kiss for me." So those are 2 stories from the Remember the Fallen Wall over at the bank of the 74 soldiers from Iowa, so that they can no longer be just a number, but be a whole person and a whole life as well. I appreciate your time coming today to hear this. I hope you share a piece of that story with somebody else so that it can grow. Thank you very much.
Can you tell us about your
Oh,
medals?
yeah, sure.
Because they're not what I expected to see. They're not tradition, I mean, they are, but they aren't.
Thank you for asking. I forget to mention that sometimes. I wanted a way to display some of my military medals without doing it the traditional way, because I'm sort of a non-traditional soldier. And the ribbon bar doesn't work on women's clothing as well, so I took it to a jewelry shop in Des Moines, and I had a metalsmith actually make this for me. So she took the ribbons off the rectangular bars, wrapped them around cylinders, took the US off of one of my buttons, one of my pins, and then reworked it in a circle. So it's sort of a one-of-a-kind representation for me that I can wear to be proud of my service or identify myself as a veteran. That's different from the ways that other people do. So thank you for asking that.
It's beautiful.
Thank you. And I'll take any other questions if anyone has one.
part of what you had referred to the Veterans National Recovery Center. And can you say anything about that?
Mm-hmm. It's a nonprofit organization based in Des Moines. It's a small group. We're growing. We're fundraising. We're looking at projects that need attention. And we do all of that on a volunteer basis. So we have done things with having getting veterans help finding jobs. We do work to raise awareness for traumatic brain injury, which is an invisible injury like post-traumatic stress. We're working very hard right now on developing a new program for military sexual trauma. So the legislation kind of became an opportunity, and we worked that very hard last year. This year we're looking at a retreat center in order to have men and women get together to do retreats as a part of their healing and coming home journey. And then we're looking at the legislation again. So we do have information online as to what it is that we do, and we're certainly going to be out in the community in the next year and two raising more awareness about us so that we can raise some community funds to do what it is that we do. Actually came back from a post-traumatic stress retreat in Milwaukee this past weekend. I went as a participant the previous year, and I went as a staff member this year, and I have found that they work. They truly work, and I've seen people go from one place on Friday to another place on Sunday that is much further along their journey than what they were getting in traditional medical model medicine by medication and therapy at the VA. May not be true for anybody, but it seems to draw in the people who are open to being worked on that way, and it does work. So I think that's a great opportunity for the community to step in as volunteers to staff and make food for and support these retreats. So we're actually going to be looking at some Iowa sites. They do Wisconsin, Texas, California, and Maryland. And I'd like to draw them a little closer to the center and get something going here in Iowa. So, anything else?
Thank you so much.
Thank
for coming.
you.
Thank